Religion. You have those that love it and those that hate it. Reddit atheists mock it in ignorance, and American fundamentalists make it look crazy. It's all the news nowadays, and it's impacting society in big ways. Another thing making its mark on the culture is video games. In fact, the majority of Americans play them in some capacity, and they hold a chief place in society's conscience. So how do these two pillars of American culture interlink? I'm Sad Guy Hours, and today we are going to be exploring the fascinating intersection of religion and video games. Since the dawn of time, man has passed on their culture through the arts. Sculptures, paintings, mosaics, stained glass, and books. Michelangelo's David, the School of Athens, the Divine Comedy. Such artifacts give us a glimpse into the societies of the past and shine a light on what they loved and what they hated, and all the emotions in between. An all too obvious to recognize theme among these cultural pieces is the emphasis on religious subject matter. In fact, at least in the West, a ton of famous art was done in service by or to the Catholic Church. Religion was not seen as simply an aspect of one's personal worldview. Not at all. It permeated all of society, so much so that life would revolve around it. Liturgical calendars, feast days, hymns, weekly mass, religious orders, the Pope with a magisterium mediating international conflicts. Religion was preeminent, all-encompassing. But a lot has changed with the times since then, post-Enlightenment. Our culture and the art it produces has greatly moved away from being explicitly religious, now preferring to explore related themes in a more subtle manner. This brings us to video games. Once seen as a low culture, and not deserving of note and unable to produce anything of meaningful substance, has now taken a central spot in the psyche of the modern generation. Video games have taken great strides in developing into a cultural phenomena. The days of simplistic Mario or Space Invaders are gone. Now video games have renowned composers behind its music that can make you feel a whole range of emotions, from awe to despair.
Walk tall, my friends.
To excitement.
All of these thoughts running through my head.
Art teams make captivating, expansive worlds that, unlike static paintings, can adapt and change. Thoughtful dialogue is given life through voice acting and model expressions. It's as if video games are the culmination of thousands of years of creative disciplines into one engaging package, and they are only getting more advanced. So how has the new phenomenon dealt with religion? Seeing as religion has historically been the central motivation to the arts. Disclaimer, this is definitely an opinion-based video, so you might have different thoughts on the games I'm going to talk about. That's great. I encourage you to voice your reasons respectfully in the comments. If you like this kind of content, why not give a like and subscribe while you're at it? The support is very much appreciated. I'm now going to put 3 prominent series into 3 separate categories: negative, positive, and nuanced. There I will explain the different depictions of religion, their history and beliefs, and then explain why I think they fit their correlating category. Starting with the negative category, we have Assassin's Creed. Personally, I've loved the series since the very first entry. As a total history nerd and a fan of stealth games, Assassin's Creed was a great series in my childhood that introduced me to real important historical events, figures, and civilizations. But for a game steeped in history, it does a poor job at representing religion, more specifically Christianity. The main antagonists are the Knights Templar. Far from a religious military order for wealthy European nobles, the Templars are construed to be a secret transnational organization which for thousands of years has striven to seize control of humanity in the name of uplifting their condition and inaugurating lasting world peace. Their vision for a perfect global society, which they term the New World Order, quite on the nose, is one which entails a world government under their dominion, whether directly imposed or in the form of a shadow regime manipulating states and society from behind the scenes. In this light, the Templars have frequently infiltrated state governments throughout history to position themselves in the highest echelons of power, operating as a deep state. They are commonly united in the classical realist beliefs of the inherent depravity of human nature and the privileging of security as a metric for peace. And these assumptions buttress their convictions that true peace can only be achieved when humanity is shepherded by a society of enlightened individuals, which in their eyes is them. A hallmark of Templar methodology has been the notion that no cost is too great for the eventual realization of their great project, and there are no means that cannot justify by the nobility of their end dream. This has translated into a penchant for orchestrating complex political crises on a monumental or even a global scale as a means of securing their long-term objectives. One can see this as a critique of Christianity, for it is the very source material. Right now, we have some who claim the top branches of our American government, like the Supreme Court, has been infiltrated by extremists who will force their worldview no matter the consequences for what they see as the greater good. It is not a new claim that religion is just a smokescreen for others to manipulate the lowly masses, but it is the established message of Assassin's Creed. On top of the Knights Templar, Assassin's Creed features the Pieces of Eden, scientifically sort of magic apples that are featured prominently, although cryptically, throughout recorded history as the cause of several divine and supernatural events. These include the Trojan War, the parting of the Red Sea, and Adam and Eve being cast out of Eden. Long before mankind existed, the Isu, a civilization of technologically advanced beings, inhabited Earth. They created humanity and enslaved them by modifying their brains to be obedient in the presence of a piece of Eden. For some time, there was a forced peace until two human Isu hybrids, Adam and Eve, stole one of the pieces, an apple, and incited the human Isu war. As all were too preoccupied by the war to see any other threat, a major solar flare impacted the Earth and significantly damaged both mankind and their makers. The Isu slowly became extinct, while mankind grew and populated the Earth, seeing their predecessors as mere myths. The pieces of Eden, however, were not destroyed by the blast, and throughout time humans began recovering them, and also causing an ideological divide, resulting in the formation of two groups, now referred to as the Templars and the Assassins. It is the Templars' aim to restore the peace in the way that the Isu had once done, forced through the pieces, whereas the Assassins, who fight for freedom and a flawed humanity, put free will above order. This wouldn't be as bad if it was a fantastical religion, but it is not. It actively contradicts all major religions and twists them into being ignorant superstitions of something wholly natural. There is no God, only advanced civilization. No miracles, only science. No truth in religion, such as Christianity, only misunderstanding. Templars are a stand-in for the Catholic Church, though in later entries they predate the Church, and they represent absolute order no matter the consequences. This is a poor characterization when it is Christian teaching which elevated the idea of free will and enshrined it in Western ethic. Consequentialism is far from the Church's teachings. No matter if the end may seem good, the ends cannot justify the means if the means are sin. They have been so held to this principle that contraception, for example, is still banned in Catholic doctrine, because even though it provides great convenience and control to individuals, it upsets the natural purposes of marriage and sex according to their doctrine. You may disagree and find such a stance archaic, but it is just one sample of proof that the Church is not in line with consequentialism, as many video games imply. Ultimately, Assassin's Creed is a negative representation of religion. It denies the legitimacy of all religious claims and replaces them with this absurd sci-fi, while caricaturing the Church as being controlled by some Illuminati New World Order supervillains. For being a series that wanted to be respectful of history, it sure did fail in treating the central pillar of all human cultures with any critical thought or decency. Still fun to be an assassin, though. Moving on from negative examples, let's start to look at positive representations of religion in video games. The Trails series is a long-standing science fantasy epic that spans over 10 games. Highly acclaimed for its expansive world building and characterization, the world has several continents featuring multiple major countries, which all have a deep history, culture, technological differences, organizations, political systems, and more. One of the main draws to the Trails games is exploring these different cultures and learning how they all interrelate to one another, as well as watching how these connections change dramatically over time with each new entry. Although sorely lacking in other games of a similar vein, Trails has not neglected to put religion in the center of their world building, which has benefited the series greatly. The Septian Church plays a massive role across all entries and is written in a remarkably sympathetic light. It was founded during the Dark Ages, when all of the main continent's population suffered from chaos from conflicting forces. It is written that it was the people's devotion towards its teachings that brought order and stability, to the whole continent, thus painting faith as an active good for society. This faith focuses its doctrines and holiness on Aidios, the sky goddess, whose sacred texts are officially recorded down as biblical scriptures. The religion itself is not a perfect monotheism, as it allows coexistence with other beliefs such as the Nord Highlanders' belief in the spiritual nature of the wind and the ancient Erebonian spirits. So, what does the church do? For starters, it oversees the vast majority of children's education through the provision of Sunday schools and classes delivered in rooms attached to the various chapels and churches found throughout the country. It is also common to see musical performances held in church venues, as the church gives great attention towards the arts. They also provide humanitarian aid and assist with keeping peace whenever they can. Two notable examples of such was providing aid to Northumbria after the appearance of the Salt Pail, by providing medical assistance and taking in orphans, as well as mediating a peace treaty to end the 100 Days' War between Erebonia and Liberal. Further still, the church plays a big role in the geopolitics of the continent. Several smaller states and free cities are recognized as suzerain states by the Septian Church, and hence use the church's influence to become independent of imperial foreign powers, places like Ohrid, Liman, and Crossbell. Contrary to the often misinformed and exaggerated reputation of the real-life Catholic Church, the Septian Church cooperates with the leaders of scientific research, such as the Epstein Foundation, to produce societal improving inventions such as the master quartz. The Septian Church is even given a thought-out hierarchy with several branches that conduct specific duties. It is easy to see that religion is not only a huge part of this massive series, but it is well respected, thought out, and even painted in an almost too good light. So now we have an example of negative representation, as well as positive representation, towards religion within video games. One side treats such ideas with a cynical and dismissive tone, painting faith as an obstacle towards freedom and enlightenment for the human race. The other side treats faith as a universal good that brings peace and order to an otherwise cruel world. Faith is shown to bring out the best in humanity and is a big driving force in improving society through science, the arts, and mediation. As a Catholic myself, I much prefer the tact of Trails over the cynicism of Assassin's Creed. But the thing is, it is a fact that religious organizations have done terrible things, such as the execution of innocents and the manipulation of doctrines to abuse and control. It is naive and disrespectful to overlook that. But it is also true that religion has built up society and has been a universal boon more often than not. It is what brings out the best in us historically speaking. It has been the champion of rights and the biggest provider of aid to the needy. To deny this is ignorant. Video games should engage with religion meaningfully and thoughtfully, just as the artists and writers of the past have. I don't believe cynical negative representation like in Assassin's Creed, nor idealistic positive representation like in Trails is very constructive for the cultural dialogue. We ought to seek more nuanced and challenging depictions which better reflect reality. One example of a more nuanced representation is from a favorite game of mine, Fire Emblem Three Houses. The lore behind this strategic fantasy game is pretty deep, so bear with me as I try to explain it adequately. The game and its lore primarily revolve around the continent of Fodlan, comprising of 3 countries, the Adrestian Empire, the Holy Kingdom of Fargus, and the Leicester Alliance. What unites these strikingly different countries is the dominant religious organization, the Church of Saros. Though the three countries have at different times fought, the church has always maintained a strong presence in all of them at the same time, even lending legitimacy to both the kingdom and the empire's founding, as the church proper was founded alongside the Etruscan Empire, which once ruled all of Fodlan. So what is the true history of this church of Saros? What does it do and teach? A goddess named Sothis descended upon Fodlan over 1,000 years ago from the heavens. She took on a humanoid form and used her blood to create her children, the Nabateans. For a while, the Nabateans were able to coexist with the native humans of Fodlan, scattered across Fodlan and acting as rulers, while sharing knowledge and skills to greatly advance their technology and help them build a prosperous civilization. This civilization was called Agartha. Eventually, the Argathans turned away from the progenitor god's teachings and abused the goddess's blessings, warring among themselves and advancing their technology ever further, to the point that they began to consider themselves as gods as well. They grew greedy, arrogant, and imperialistic, eventually challenging the goddess herself for dominance. The Agarthans fought directly against Sothis by launching multiple pillars of light towards various Nabatean cities, which, while successfully destroying them, failed to deal direct damage to Sothis. In retaliation, Sothis unleashed a phenomenon described as a flood called despair. This flood destroyed the Agarthan civilization and forced the survivors to hide underground, where they plotted their revenge. The ensuing war devastated the continent beyond recognition, forcing the goddess to spend an immense amount of time, which was implied to be at least 1,000 years, and to expend most of her energy to heal the land, and thus she retired to her holy tomb at Zanado in the Ogman Mountains to slumber. The Agarthans, who escaped the wrath of the progenitor god, retreated underground and began plotting their long revenge, becoming those who slither in the dark, the true antagonists of the plot. Sometime after, the Agarthan survivors allied themselves with a thief named Nemesis, and guided him into the holy tomb to slay the slumbering Sothis and acquire both her blood and bones. The Agarthans also helped him craft a powerful weapon from her remains, the Sword of the Creator. Seizing the opportunity, Nemesis gathered support from his fellow humans and claimed that he would liberate them from the rule of the Nabateans. With his newfound power and support, Nemesis' group then attacked Zanado, killing nearly all the Nabateans, acquiring their blood, which would come to be known as crests, and crafted the heroes' relics from their remains. Unaware that Saros, the last child of Sothis, had survived the onslaught, Saros traveled across the land, allying herself with Wilhelm Paul Hresfelg, and recruited other Nabatean survivors scattered across Fodlan. These survivors later publicly became the Four Saints. She also fostered the foundation of Wilhelm's Etruscan Empire with the sole intention of vanquishing Nemesis and his allies. For her cause, Saros performed multiple miracles, founded the Church of Saros, and along with her fellow saints, granted Wilhelm and his men their blood, all while creating the narrative that Nemesis, and by extension his 10 elites, had been previously blessed by the goddess Sothis to destroy wicked gods before they eventually became corrupted by power, a measure Saros took due to Nemesis' already existing reputation as a hero of humanity. The clash between the Etruscan Empire and Nemesis' Liberation Army eventually led to the War of Heroes in Imperial Year 46, which came to an end in 66 years later, once Nemesis and his 10 elites had been slain, and the later's descendants had been spared and absorbed into the empire. Afterwards, Saros recovered the hero's relics and hid her mother's body in the mausoleum of Garrick Mach Monastery, built over the Holy Tomb in Imperial year 185. Saros also faked her death and assumed control of the Church of Saros, with the intent of supervising Fodlan to maintain peace in the years to come. She would rewrite the history of Fodlan. This new history erased all notions of Agarthans and Nabateans. No longer were the godlike weapons desecrated body parts of the goddess and her children. They were gifts from the goddess herself. No longer were crests stolen blood. They were also blessings. No longer were Nemesis and his 10 elites vile bandits. They were ancient heroes who fought evil gods. Saros rewrote history so that the tragedies of the past, the countless warfare and greed, would never be repeated. The Church of Saros would stand uncontested in the primary religion for all of Fodlan. Due to its immense influence, war was kept to a minimum due to its benevolent mediation for hundreds of years, though there were some exceptions. So that's the history of this religion. Now, what does it believe? Quoted from in-game texts. The goddess is in all things. She is heaven above and the land below. She is eternity incarnate. She is the present, the past, and the future. Her eyes see all, her ears hear all, her hands receive all. She who is graced with the holy word of the divine goddess, who bore witness to her magnificence, is the one called Saros. She is the messenger of the heavens, the bridge between the lands above and below, and her blessings shall bring tidings of peace to all. With the goddess's omnipotence and wisdom to guide her, Saros ensures that her will be done. As the goddess's sword, Saros wards away evil. As the goddess's child, Saros makes emperors of mortals. As the goddess's wings, Saros elevates her people. As the goddess's voice, Saros spreads the word of love. That sublime sword is entrusted to you. Those emperors are crowned before you. Those wings clear the path. That voice whispers words of trust. May the blessing of the goddess follow you always. Creation. In the beginning, amid the great cloudless ocean, Fodlan came to be. At the end of a long journey, the goddess glimpsed at land and there alighted. Upon that sacred ground, she breathed life into the world and created all the creatures upon it. By the goddess's hands, plants took root, birds took to the sky, and animals roamed the land. Last of all, she created humanity. When the humans wished for power, she granted it. She gifted them with the blessings of the heaven and of the earth. By way of the magical arts, humanity attained great power, yet unaware that great power portends great evil. By the grace of the goddess's divine protection, humanity thrived. Through her blessings, they grew prosperous and their numbers rose. Before long, they became the most powerful creatures in all of Fodlan. All was well until darkness descended from the north, a darkness that devoured the earth, desecrated the heavens, and threw the world and its inhabitants into a state of chaos. To face this evil force, the goddess created a new well of power. She gifted certain chosen individuals with sacred blood, allowing them to wield mystical weapons, that they may prevail against the darkness. These souls, buoyed by their divine gifts, conquered the great evil ones and drove them back to the north. They came to be known as heroes. The heroes experienced unnaturally long lives, persisting for hundreds of years, even after they breathed their last. The power coursing through their blood remained, leaving an indelible mark upon this world. This power, passed through bloodlines, came to be known as the crests. The mystical weapons they once wielded are now called heroes' relics, and so the legend of a new age was born. The descendants of the heroes sought their ancestors' power and thusly their blood. In time, they amassed crests, relics, land, and wealth, using all to set the lands aflame with war. The goddess's power, intended to stem the flow of evil, became a tool of destruction, all because of the greed of humanity. The goddesses, grieved and heartbroken, hid herself in the heavens from whence she came. The 5 eternal commandments. Dare not doubt or deny the power or existence of the goddess. Dare not speak the goddess's name in vain. Dare not disrespect your father, mother, or any who serve the goddess. Dare not abuse the power gifted to you by the goddess. Dare not to kill, harm, lie, or steal, unless such acts are committed by the will of the goddess. The goddess cares for and protects all that is beautiful in the world. The goddess will never deny the splendors of love, affection, joy, peace, faith, kindness, temperance, modesty, or patience. Follow her example, and in doing so, abide her laws. As we can see, this is not just some background religion placed in to simply have one in place. It has purposes, values, convictions, and claims on truth. It's to be taken seriously by the inhabitants of Fodlan in the game. And as such, it functions as a valid medium to communicate a meaningful message to the players of the game. So now we know the true and false history of the church, as well as what it believes. But what does it do? As referenced before, the church is the primary force that keeps peace across the continent and has been remarkably successful. There has been a few exceptions, such as the establishment of the Holy Kingdom of Fargus out of the Adrestian Empire, which the church supported. Beyond this, they are the primary givers of humanitarian aid. This can be seen during their assistance during the tragedy of Dusker. They care for the orphan as well as the exile, even accepting unbelieving foreigners into its service. They facilitate faith, which inspires and preserves the majority of the inhabitants of Fodlan. This faith also somewhat restricts abuses from the nobility, though evil finds a way. The church holds an academy at Garrick Mock Monastery, where they bring together nobles and commoners alike from all 3 nations to learn and bond with one another, an effort at bridging the divides between them. Finally, they safeguard relics, which are essentially weapons of mass destruction, from being misused, and they actively teach against the misuse of crests and the discrimination some justify through them. This all sounds very good and charitable, but that is not the whole story. The church also restricts the access and propagation of information, forbidden texts with an iron grip. They changed the very calendar to better infuse the religion into society, as well as stifling scientific advances like the invention of glass lenses, the printing press, autopsies, and the usage of oil. They are quick to execute heretics and dissenters within the church, even using students from the academy to do so in order to show what happens when one makes an enemy of the church. These seemingly negative aspects parallel real-life critiques of the Catholic Church historically, and in doing so, paint a gray picture, neither purely benevolent, and also far from evil. Even the critiques can and have been argued to be justified. It makes sense that the church would limit technology when that was the very fall of the Agarthans that came before. It makes sense that the church would alter history and limit information, for if the world knew the true nature of relics and crests, nobles and foreign armies would seek to use them for evil and conquest as they did before. It makes sense practically to get rid of heretics and dissenters, for it is the unity of the church which holds the fragile piece of Fodlan together. So on and so on. Ultimately, it is up to the player to decide how to feel about the church. They aren't told, and the narrative leaves it up to interpretation. Even to this day, years later, people still debate on the legitimacy of the Church of Saros. This is how religion ought to be written, in my opinion. Neither cynical nor naive, but nuanced and extensively explored instead of dismissed or treated as inapplicable to real life. It should be something that creates a working dialogue about the values and ethics present within the themes of the game, just as religion does in the real world. That's my opinion for you. A medium as powerful as video games ought to be utilized not just for entertainment, but as an art that moves the culture forward.